Rise up, O flame, by thy lights glowing, bring to us beauty, wisdom, and joy. Chatterer, the red squirrel, had been scolding because there was no excitement. He had even tried to make some excitement by waking Bobby Coon and making him so angry that Bobby had threatened to eat him alive. It had been great fun to dance around and call Bobby names and make fun of him. Oh, yes, it had been great fun. You see, he knew all the time that Bobby couldn't catch him if he tried. But now things were different. Chatterer had all the excitement that he wanted. Indeed, he had more than he wanted. The truth is, Chatterer was running for his life, and he knew it. It is a terrible thing, a very terrible thing, to have to run for one's life. Peter Rabbit knows all about it. He has run for his life often. Sometimes it has been Reddy Fox behind him, sometimes Bowser the Hound, and once or twice Old Man Coyote. Peter has known that on his long legs his life has depended, and more than once a terrible fear has filled his heart. But Peter has also known that if he could reach the old stone wall, or the dear old briar patch first, he would be safe, and he always has reached it. So when he has been running with that terrible fear in his heart, there has always been hope there, too. But Chatterer the Red Squirrel was running without hope. Yes, sir, there was nothing but fear, terrible fear in his heart, for he knew not where to go. The hollow tree, or the holes in the old stone wall where he would be safe from anyone else, even Farmer Brown's boy, offered him no safety now. For the one who was following him with hunger in his anger-red eyes could go anywhere that he could go into any hole big enough for him to squeeze into. You see, it was Shadow the Weasel from whom Chatterer was running, and Shadow is so slim that he can slip in and out of places that even Chatterer cannot get through. Chatterer knew all this, and so because it was of no use to run to his usual safe hiding places, he ran in just the other direction. He didn't know where he was going. He had just one thought, to run and run as long as he could. And then, well, he would try to fight, though he knew it would be of no use. Oh dear, he sobbed as he ran out on the branch of a tree and leapt across to the next tree. I wish I had minded my own business. I wish I had kept my tongue still. Shadow the Weasel wouldn't have known where I was if he hadn't heard my voice. Oh dear me, what can I do? What can I do? Now in his great fright, Chatterer had run and jumped so hard that he was beginning to grow very tired. Presently he found that he must make a very long jump to reach the next tree. He had often made as long a jump as this and thought nothing of it. But now he was so tired that the distance looked twice as great as it really was. He didn't dare stop to run down the tree and scamper across. So he took a long breath, ran swiftly along the branch, and leapt. His hands just touched the tip of the nearest branch of the other tree. He tried his very best to hold on, but he couldn't. Then down, down, down he fell. He spread himself out as flat as he could, and that saved him a little. But still it was a dreadful fall. And when he landed, it seemed for just a minute as if all the breath had gone from his body. But it wasn't quite, and in another minute he was scrambling up the tree. Chatterer was still running for his life, and without the least hope, when suddenly he saw a last chance to escape from Shadow the Weasel. That is, he saw something that might offer him a chance. He couldn't be sure until he had tried, and even then he might escape from one danger, only to run right into another equally great. What Chatterer saw was a big brown bunch near the top of a tall chestnut tree, and he headed for that tree as fast as ever he could go. What was that big brown bunch? Why, it was Redtail the Hawk, who was dozing there with his head drawn down between his shoulders, dreaming. Now, old Redtail is one of Chatterer's deadliest enemies. He is quite as fond of Red Squirrel as is Shadow the Weasel, though he doesn't often try to catch one, because there are other things to eat, much easier to get. Chatterer had had more than one narrow escape from old Redtail, and was very much afraid of him. Yet here he was, running up the very tree in which Redtail was sitting. You see, a very daring idea had come into his head. He had seen at once that Redtail was dozing, and hadn't seen him at all. He knew that Redtail would just as soon have Shadow the Weasel for dinner as himself, and a very daring plan had popped into his head. I may as well be caught by Redtail as Shadow, he thought as he ran up the tree. But if my plan works out right, I won't be caught by either. Anyway, it is my very last chance. Up the tree he scrambled, and after him went Shadow the Weasel. Shadow had been so intent on catching Chatterer that he had not noticed old Redtail, which was just as Chatterer had hoped. Up he scrambled, straight past old Redtail. But as he passed, he pulled one of Redtail's long tail feathers, and then ran on to the top of the tree, and with the last bit of strength he had left, leapt to a neighboring spruce tree, where, hidden by the thick branches, he stopped to rest and see what would happen. Of course, when he felt his tail pulled, old Redtail was wide awake in a flash, and of course he looked down to see who had dared to pull his tail. There, just below him, was Shadow the Weasel, who had just that minute discovered who was sitting there. Old Redtail hissed sharply, and the feathers on the top of his head stood up in a way they do when he is angry. And he was angry, very angry. Shadow the Weasel stopped short. Then, like a flash, he dodged around to the other side of the tree. He had no thought of Chatterer now. Things had changed all in an instant, quite changed. Instead of the hunter, he was now the hunted. Old Redtail circled in the air just overhead, and every time he caught sight of Shadow, he swooped at him with great, cruel claws spread out to clutch him. Shadow dodged around the trunk of the tree. He was more angry than frightened, for his sharp eyes had spied a little hollow in a branch of the chestnut tree, and he knew that once inside of that he would have nothing to fear. But he was angry clear through to think that he should be cheated out of that dinner he had been so sure of only a few minutes before. So he screeched angrily at Old Redtail, and then, watching his chance, scampered out to the hollow and whisked inside just in the nick of time. Chatterer, watching from the spruce tree, gave a great sigh of relief. He saw Redtail the Hawk post himself on the top of a tall tree where he could keep watch of that hollow in which Shadow had disappeared, and he knew that it would be a long time before Shadow would dare poke even his nose outside. Then, as soon as he was rested, Chatterer stole softly, oh so softly, away through the treetops until he was sure that Redtail could not see him. Then he hurried. He wanted to get just as far away from Shadow the Weasel as he could. Chatterer hurried through the green forest. He didn't know just where he was going. He had but one thought, and that was to get as far away from Shadow the Weasel as he could. It made him have cold shivers all over every time he thought of Shadow. "Seems to me you are in a great hurry," said a voice from a pine tree he was passing. Chatterer knew that voice without looking to see who was speaking. Everybody in the great green forest knows that voice. It was the voice of Sammy Jay. Chatterer wanted to stop and pick a quarrel with Sammy, as he usually did when they met. But the fear of Shadow the Weasel was still upon him. I am," he said in a very low voice. Sammy looked as if he thought he hadn't heard right. Never before had he known Chatterer to admit that he was afraid, for you know Chatterer is a great boaster. It must be something very serious to frighten Chatterer like that. "What's that?" Sammy asked sharply. "I always knew you to be a coward, but this is the first time I've ever known you to admit it. Who are you running away from?" "Shadow the Weasel," replied Chatterer, still in a very low voice, as if he were afraid of being overheard. "Shadow the Weasel is back in the Green Forest, and I have just had such a narrow escape." "Oh," cried Sammy, "this is important. I thought Shadow was up in the old pasture. If he has come back to the Green Forest, folks ought to know. Where is he now?" Chatterer stopped and told Sammy all about his narrow escape and how he had left Shadow the Weasel in a hollow of a chestnut tree, with Redtail the Hawk watching for him to come out. Sammy's eyes sparkled when Chatterer told how he had pulled the tail of old Redtail. "And he doesn't now know who did it. He thinks it was Shadow," concluded Chatterer with a weak little grin. "Ho, ho, ho! Ha, ha, ha!" laughed Sammy Jay. "I wish I had been there to see it." Suddenly he grew grave. "Other folks certainly ought to know that Shadow is back in the Green Forest," said he, "so that they may be on their guard. Then if they get caught, it is their own fault. I think I'll go spread the news." You see, for all his mean ways, Sammy Jay does have some good in him, just as everybody does, and he dearly loves to tell important news. I wish you would go first of all and tell my cousin Happy Jack the Gray Squirrel, said Chatterer, speaking in a hesitant way. Sammy Jay leaned over and looked at Chatterer sharply. I thought you and Happy Jack were not friends, said he. You always seem to be quarreling. Chatterer looked a little confused, but he is very quick with his tongue. That's just it, he replied quickly. That's just it. If anything should happen to Happy Jack, I wouldn't have him to quarrel with, and it's so much fun to see him get mad. Now, of course, the real reason why Chatterer wanted Happy Jack warned was because down inside he was ashamed of a dreadful thought that had come to him of leading Shadow the Weasel to Happy Jack's house so that he himself might escape. It had been a dreadful thought, a cowardly thought, and Chatterer had been really ashamed that he should ever have had such a thought. He thought now that if he could do something for Happy Jack, he would feel better about it. Sammy Jay promised to go straight to Happy Jack and warn him that Shadow the Weasel was back in the Green Forest, and off he started, screaming the news as he flew, so that all the little people in the Green Forest might know. Chatterer listened a few minutes and then started on. Where shall I go? He muttered. Where shall I go? I don't dare stay in the Green Forest, for now Shadow will never rest until he catches me. And it may be that he will have to leave the Green Forest. We'll find out another time. Snip, snap, snapped, the tale is told.